When you were a child, before anyone told you what was practical, before anyone explained the job market to you, before the adults in your life started gently steering you toward something safe and reasonable, what did you want to do? What lit you up? What made you forget to eat, forget to sleep, forget that time existed at all? Most people, when they answer that question honestly, feel a small ache. Because somewhere between childhood and adulthood, that thing, that burning, irrational, magnificent thing, got quietly set aside. It didn't disappear all at once. It faded gradually, like a radio signal getting weaker the further you drive from the station. Someone told you it wasn't realistic. Or you told yourself. Or life simply got complicated, and practical decisions accumulated, one on top of another, until one day you looked up and realized you were living a life that made sense on paper but felt hollow on the inside. You have a job. Maybe even a good one. You have responsibilities. You have a routine. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, the question you stopped asking yourself is, does this matter to me? Not does it pay well. Not does it look impressive. Not does it make other people comfortable with your choices. Does it matter to you? This is the central tragedy of modern life. Not failure, but the slow, quiet surrender of passion. The gradual replacement of what you love with what is acceptable. The trade of a meaningful life for a manageable one. And here is what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't feel like a dramatic loss. It feels like growing up. It feels like being responsible. It feels like the right thing to do. Until you're 40, or 50, or 60, and you realize that the responsible thing you chose cost you the only life you were ever going to have. There is a man whose entire existence was a furious, passionate, sometimes maddening argument against that kind of life. A man who looked at the world as it was and simply refused to accept that this was how it had to be. A man who didn't fit, didn't conform, didn't apologize for either, and in doing so, changed every industry he touched. His name was Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. He was adopted at birth. His biological mother, a young graduate student named Joanne Stiebel, made an arrangement with Paul and Clara Jobs, a working-class couple with no college degrees, a modest home, and an enormous amount of love to give. Paul Jobs was a machinist. He worked with his hands. And from the time Steve was very small, Paul brought him into the garage and taught him how things worked, how to take them apart, how to put them back together, how to see the engineering inside everyday objects. He taught his son that there was craft in making things well, that the back of the cabinet mattered just as much as the front, even if no one would ever see it. That lesson, that quality is not a performance, it is a standard, would define everything Steve Jobs ever built. He grew up in the Santa Clara Valley, which was just beginning its transformation into what we now call Silicon Valley. Electronics companies were sprouting up around him. Engineers and tinkerers filled the neighborhood. The air smelled like possibility. But Steve was not an easy child. He was intense, demanding, prone to obsession, and almost completely unable to tolerate things he found mediocre. At school, he was frequently in trouble, not because he wasn't brilliant, but because conventional schooling couldn't hold him. He needed to go faster, deeper, further than the curriculum allowed. He found his people, eventually. Older kids and adults who were as obsessed with electronics as he was. He cold-called the co-founder of Hewlett-Packard as a teenager to ask for spare parts. He got them. He was 13 years old. That audacity, the belief that the answer might be yes if you simply ask, never left him. In 1972, Steve Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. And 6 months later, he dropped out. Not because he was failing. Not because college was too hard. But because he couldn't justify the cost of a conventional education to his working-class parents, who had saved everything they had to send him there. He didn't want to spend their money on classes that didn't feel meaningful. So he dropped out and then hung around. He slept on floors. He returned Coke bottles for the deposit money to buy food. He walked across town every Sunday night to get a free meal at a Hare Krishna temple. And in between, he audited the classes he actually wanted to take. Classes that interested him. Classes that had no obvious practical application. One of them was calligraphy. He learned about serif and sans serif typefaces. about the spacing between letters, about what makes typography beautiful. He had no idea, at the time, why he was learning this. There was no plan. There was only curiosity. 10 years later, when he was designing the first Macintosh computer, that calligraphy class became the foundation of its beautiful typography, the first personal computer to offer multiple fonts and proportional spacing. It was a decision that shaped the visual language of every computer that followed. He said later, in his famous 2005 Stanford commencement address, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever." This is the first great principle of Steve Jobs' life. Follow your curiosity, even when, especially when, it makes no practical sense. The passionate pursuit of what genuinely interests you will produce results that no amount of strategic planning could have manufactured. Passion is not a luxury. It is a navigation system. In 1976, Steve Jobs co-founded Apple Computer with Steve Wozniak in his parents' garage in Los Altos. He was 21 years old. Wozniak was the engineer, a genuine genius who could build things that shouldn't have been possible. But Jobs was something else entirely. He was the one who looked at what Wozniak could build and understood, viscerally, immediately, what it meant, what it could mean for the world. At the time, computers were for corporations and universities. They were enormous, expensive, operated by specialists. The idea of a personal computer, a computer that an ordinary person could own and use, was considered absurd by most of the industry. Jobs didn't find the idea absurd. He found it inevitable. He was consumed by a single vision. Technology should be humanized. It should be beautiful. It should feel like it was made for people, not by engineers for engineers. The intersection of technology and the liberal arts, this was his obsession. This was his religion. The Apple II launched in 1977 and was a massive commercial success. The company went public in 1980, making Jobs a multimillionaire at 25. By 1984, the Macintosh launched with the most celebrated advertisement in the history of television. Ridley Scott's 1984 spot aired during the Super Bowl and changed the personal computer industry forever. Steve Jobs was 29 years old. He had already done more than most people do in a lifetime. And then the company he built fired him. In 1985, after a bitter power struggle with John Sculley, the CEO Jobs himself had recruited, Apple's board of directors sided with Sculley and stripped Jobs of his operational responsibilities. Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple, the company he had started in a garage, that he had poured every ounce of his passion into, that bore his fingerprints on every product. It pushed him out the door. He was 30 years old. By any conventional measure, this should have destroyed him. And for a period, it did wound him deeply. He described it later as devastating, as if the ground had been pulled from under him, as if his entire identity had been taken away. But then something happened. Freed from Apple, freed from the weight of running a company whose culture had drifted far from his original vision, Jobs did what passionate people do when the structure around them collapses. He started building again. He founded Next, a computer company focused on higher education and business. He acquired a small computer graphics division from filmmaker George Lucas, a struggling operation he believed in despite its losses, and turned it into Pixar Animation Studios. While Next was a commercial struggle, Pixar became something miraculous. Toy Story, released in 1995, was the world's first feature-length computer-animated film. It was a phenomenon. When Pixar went public that same year, Steve Jobs, who had purchased it for $10 million, became a billionaire. More importantly, Pixar proved something about Jobs that Apple had made people forget. His gift was not just technology. It was storytelling. It was beauty. It was the ability to look at something that had never been done and see it complete, perfect, already finished, and then will it into existence through the force of his vision and the relentless standard of his taste. He said of his years away from Apple, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life." Failure, for Steve Jobs, was not the opposite of success. It was the compost that made it possible. In 1997, Apple, on the brink of bankruptcy, 12 weeks from insolvency, acquired Next. And Steve Jobs came home. What followed is one of the most extraordinary corporate turnarounds in business history. Jobs immediately cut Apple's bloated product line from dozens of items to four products. He told his team, "We are going to do a few things, and we are going to do them perfectly." He refocused, rebuilt, and reimagined what Apple was for. In 1998, the iMac launched, a computer in a translucent, colorful shell that looked like nothing anyone had ever seen. People bought it because it was beautiful. That had never happened with a computer before. Then came iTunes and the iPod in 2001, which didn't just create a product, they reinvented the entire music industry. The iPhone in 2007 didn't just create a new device, it made every other phone on the market obsolete overnight. The iPad in 2010 created an entirely new category of computing. One man, one company, multiple industries, transformed. How? Not by following trends. Not by listening to focus groups. Not by asking people what they wanted and then building it. Jobs famously rejected that approach entirely. He said, "People don't know what they want until you show it to them." He believed that the job of a visionary is not to reflect the world as it is, but to imagine the world as it could be, and then build that with enough craft and conviction that people recognize it the moment they see it. Even if they didn't know they were waiting for it. This is thinking differently. Not as a marketing slogan, though Apple's Think Different campaign was brilliant, but as a genuine, lived philosophy. The refusal to accept that the existing way of doing things is the only way. The belief that the world can always be reimagined. Steve Jobs operated by a set of principles so consistent they became almost mythological. Craft over everything. Jobs was infamous for his obsession with detail. He cared about the font on the screen. He cared about the curve of the corner of the device. He cared about the inside of the machine, the parts no customer would ever see, because he believed that the maker knows. That you cannot build something beautiful on the outside while being careless on the inside. Quality is not a feature. It is a character. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. This was his North Star. He believed that removing things required more courage and more skill than adding them. Every great Apple product was defined not by what it did, but by what it refused to do. Every unnecessary button, every redundant feature, every complication that could be eliminated, was eliminated. What remained was something that felt inevitable. Obvious. Like it couldn't have been any other way. The intersection of technology and the liberal arts. Jobs was not a conventional technologist. He was obsessed with Bob Dylan and the Beatles. He studied Zen Buddhism. He took calligraphy. He believed that the products that would change the world were the ones that lived at the crossing point of technical excellence and human feeling. He didn't want to make tools. He wanted to make experiences. Saying no is a creative act. He said, "I'm as proud of many of the things we haven't done as the things I have done." Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. Every yes costs you 20 no's. Protecting your focus, your time, your attention, your creative energy, from the good ideas so you can pursue the great ones. That requires saying no constantly, aggressively, unapologetically. Death as the ultimate clarifying force. In his Stanford address, Jobs spoke about his cancer diagnosis with a directness that startled people. "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important." He used the awareness of his own mortality not as a source of despair but as a lens. A filter. A way of asking, given that my time is finite, is this how I want to spend it? Is this who I want to be? Steve Jobs died on October 5, 2011, from pancreatic cancer. He was 56 years old. The world paused. People left flowers and candles outside Apple stores in cities they had never visited. Engineers and artists and students and grandparents, people who had never met him, who would never know him, felt the loss personally. Because his work had been personal. His products had been made with enough care and enough love that people felt it on the other side. That is the measure of a life driven by passion. Not the wealth, not the fame, not the market capitalization, but the fact that what you made carried something of you inside it. Some trace of your obsession, your taste, your standard, and people felt that, recognized it, were changed by it. He left behind something no balance sheet can capture. The proof that one person, operating from genuine passion and refusing to accept the world as it currently is, can reshape it. Not once, not twice, multiple times, in one lifetime. You don't need to be Steve Jobs. The world does not need another Steve Jobs. The world needs you, the specific, unrepeatable version of you that exists when you stop trying to fit someone else's template and start following what genuinely ignites you. First, take your passion seriously. Not as a hobby. Not as a side project you'll get to someday. As the central organizing principle of how you spend your energy. Jobs didn't pursue technology as a career move. He pursued it because it consumed him. That quality of engagement, that full-body, full-mind investment in what you love, is what produces work that matters. You cannot fake it. You cannot manufacture it. But you can choose to honor it. Second, think differently about what thinking differently means. It is not about being contrarian for its own sake. It is not about rejecting conventional wisdom just to seem original. It is about genuinely questioning whether the existing way of doing things is actually the best way, or just the way that got established and never challenged. In your work, your relationships, your creative life. Where are you accepting limitations that aren't actually limitations? Where is there a better way that nobody has tried because everyone assumes it can't be done? Third, embrace the dots you cannot connect yet. The calligraphy class. The year in India studying Buddhism. The Pixar years. None of it looked strategic. All of it was essential. Your life is building something you cannot yet see. The experiences that seem random, the interests that seem impractical, the detours that seem like mistakes, they are the raw material of whatever you are becoming. Trust the accumulation. Follow the curiosity. The connections will reveal themselves in retrospect. Fourth, let failure change you, not stop you. Being fired from Apple was the making of Steve Jobs. Not the wounding, the making. Failure has a way of burning away the inessential and leaving only what truly matters to you. If something has collapsed in your life, a career, a relationship, a plan you worked hard on, ask what it is revealing. What was you, and what was just the structure around you? What remains when the comfortable certainties are gone? That remainder is where your real work begins. Fifth, do it with craft. Whatever you pursue it completely. Not adequately. Not sufficiently. Completely. Care about the details other people dismiss. Care about the back of the cabinet. Care about the curve of the corner. Care about the things that don't show, because the standard you hold in private becomes the quality you deliver in public. Excellence is not an act. It is a habit, built in the 1,000 small choices you make when no one is watching. Here is what I want to leave you with. Somewhere inside you, there is something you care about more than you let yourself admit. Maybe you've been careful about it. Maybe you've kept it private, protected, insulated from the judgment of people who might not understand it. Maybe you've told yourself it's not practical, not realistic, not the kind of thing that pays the bills. Maybe you've done what most people do, and slowly, quietly, rationalized it into silence. Steve Jobs' life is a direct argument against that silence. He was adopted, unconventional, difficult, fired, sick, misunderstood, and he refused, at every turn, to let any of that become an excuse to live smaller than his vision demanded. He looked at the world as it was and said, "This can be better. I can make it better. And I will not stop until it is." That is not arrogance. That is passion. That is what passion looks like when it is fully alive and fully unleashed. You have one life. One. Not a rehearsal. Not a draft. This is the version that counts. And the question Steve Jobs would ask you, the question he asked himself every morning, looking in the mirror, is this: if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? If the answer is no too many days in a row, something has to change. Not everything needs to change at once. Not every change needs to be dramatic. But something needs to move. Some step, however small, in the direction of what actually matters to you. Some choice, however quiet, to honor the passion you've been postponing. Because the world is not changed by people who waited until conditions were perfect. It is changed by people who cared so much about something that they couldn't wait any longer. Be one of those people. Think differently. Build beautifully. Love what you do enough that it shows in everything you make. The rest will follow.